The night had settled over the desert like a heavy blanket, the air cool and crisp after the scorching heat of the day. Jack Turner and the mysterious woman, whose name he now knew was Waya, sat around a small fire. The light of the flames danced in their eyes, casting long shadows on their faces. Jack had thought that the desert nights were always quiet, but tonight it felt different. There was something about Waya's presence that made everything feel unsettled. Waya sat with her back straight, her eyes fixed on the fire. She didn't seem tired, despite the long journey they had taken. Jack, on the other hand, was exhausted. His body ached from the ride and his mind was clouded with questions. He had spent most of his life alone, doing whatever it took to survive. But now, in this small camp with Waya, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. For the first time in years, Jack wasn't thinking about the bounty he was chasing or the people he had to hunt. He was thinking about the offer Waya had made. "I can give you a family." The words echoed in his mind. He had never considered having a family. After losing his brother, he had sworn off the idea of ever getting close to anyone again. Yet here he was, sitting by the fire with a woman he had just met, considering what seemed impossible. The crackling of the fire was the only sound for a long time. Jack shifted uncomfortably on the ground, his hand resting on his rifle. He had to ask the question that had been on his mind ever since Waya spoke those strange words. "Why did you say that?" Jack finally broke the silence, his voice steady but filled with curiosity. "Why did you promise me a family?" Waya didn't answer right away. She seemed lost in thought, her dark eyes staring into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but full of a depth that Jack couldn't quite understand. "You're a man who's been alone for too long, Cowboy," she said quietly, without looking at him. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself. You wear your pain like armor. You've been running from it for years, haven't you?" Jack stiffened at her words. He didn't like talking about the past, especially not with someone he had just met. But somehow with Waya he felt like he could let down his guard. She wasn't like anyone he had ever encountered before. There was a quiet wisdom in her, something that made her seem older than her years. "I don't need anyone," Jack replied, his voice rough. "I've done just fine on my own." Waya turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for the first time since they had sat down. There was no judgment in her gaze, just understanding. "Maybe you've survived." "Cowboy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But surviving isn't the same as living." Jack looked away, unwilling to let her see the effect her words had on him. He had heard people talk like this before, but it had always sounded like nonsense. Life was about survival, wasn't it? It wasn't about family or connection or anything soft. It was about keeping your head down, doing what needed to be done and moving on. That's how he had lived, and that's how he planned to keep living. But Waya's words gnawed at him. He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. There was a hollow space inside him, one that had been empty ever since his brother's death. He had filled it with hunting, with violence, with loneliness, but it never truly went away. It lingered like a scar that wouldn't heal. Maybe, just maybe, Waya was offering something he needed more than he realized. Jack took a deep breath and let the silence settle between them for a moment. The fire crackled again, the only sound breaking the stillness of the desert night. "Tell me about your people," Jack said, his voice softer now, a hint of curiosity creeping in. "The Apache. How are they still alive?" Waya's eyes seemed to darken at the mention of her people. She took a slow breath before speaking, her words heavy with emotion. "The Apaches were once a proud people," she began, her voice distant, as though she were reliving a memory. "We lived freely in the mountains, in the deserts, in the forests. We had our own way of life, our own customs, our own laws. But that changed when the settlers came. At first we tried to live in peace, but they wanted our land. They wanted everything." Jack could see the pain in her eyes as she spoke, but he stayed silent, letting her continue. "They killed our warriors, destroyed our villages, and took everything from us. They wanted us to surrender, to bend to their will, but we fought. We fought until there was nothing left to fight for. Now I'm the last of my tribe, the last Apache who knows what it means to be free." Jack didn't know what to say. The life Waya described was so different from his own, yet he couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. He had always been focused on his own survival, but he had never stopped to think about what it meant for others. He had always seen the Apaches as enemies, as people who fought against the law. But now hearing Waya's words, he started to wonder if they had ever truly been the enemies. Waya's gaze softened as she spoke again, this time more gently. I don't expect you to understand, Cowboy. I know you've seen things that have made you bitter. But I'm offering you a chance. A chance to belong to something, to be a part of a family again. It's not just a promise, it's a gift. I can give you a place, a purpose. You don't have to keep running. Jack looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since they had met. The woman before him wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader, someone who had been through unimaginable loss but still carried hope. She had seen the worst of the world and still managed to hold on to something that Jack couldn't quite name. I don't know if I'm ready for something like that, Jack said, his voice almost a whisper. You don't have to be ready, Waya replied softly. Sometimes life doesn't ask if we're ready. It just gives us the chance. It's up to us whether we take it. For the first time in years, Jack thought maybe he had been wrong. Maybe there was more to life than just surviving. Maybe, just maybe, he could stop running. As the fire flickered and the desert night stretched out before them, Jack realized that his journey was about to change. The promise Waya had made, I can give you a family, felt different now. It wasn't just an offer. It was a chance to live. And for the first time, Jack wasn't so sure he wanted to turn away from it. The journey north took longer than Jack expected. The desert, once wide and open, began to narrow into rugged hills and sharp rocks. As the days passed, the air grew cooler, and the terrain more challenging. Jack's horse, though strong and steady, seemed to struggle with the rough ground. He could feel the weariness settling into his bones, but Waya moved forward with quiet determination, her eyes always focused on the horizon. Jack couldn't help but notice how different she was from anyone he had ever known. While he struggled with the harshness of the desert, she seemed to be in her element, her movements graceful even in the most difficult conditions. She was not just surviving, she was thriving. By the fourth day of their journey, they reached the foothills. The land here was even more isolated, with only a few scattered signs of life. Jack felt a strange unease. He had grown up hearing stories of the Apache, their warriors, and their fierce independence. But he had never imagined he would find himself walking alongside one of them, heading into what could only be described as an Apache stronghold. Waya led the way with confidence, her pace steady, as if she had walked these hills 1,000 times. Jack followed, his thoughts filled with questions. What would he find when they reached her people? What kind of life had they built, hidden away from the rest of the world? After another few hours of winding through narrow canyons and steep paths, they reached a small valley. The land here was different from the barren desert. There were patches of green, and a small stream ran through the center. Jack could hear the sound of water flowing, and the smell of earth and grass filled the air. The valley was quiet, peaceful even. Waya stopped just at the edge of the valley and turned to Jack. This is it, she said softly, her voice full of pride. This is where my people have found shelter. It's not much, but it's home. Jack looked around. The place was beautiful in its own way, hidden from the outside world yet alive with nature. He could see small, simple dwellings made from wood and stone, blending seamlessly with the environment. A few children played near the water, their laughter light and carefree. Elderly men and women sat outside the dwellings, talking softly to one another. It felt different from the cold, unforgiving world Jack had known. Where is everyone? Jack asked, his eyes scanning the area. He had expected a larger group, maybe even a fortress-like settlement, but what he saw was much more humble. They're here, Waya replied with a knowing smile. Not all of them stay in one place at a time. Some of them are out hunting. Others are gathering. We move as we need to. Jack nodded, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The Apache, he had been taught, were warriors wild and untamed. But what he saw before him was something different. These people didn't look like they were waiting for a fight. They looked like they were living, like they had found a way to survive without constant conflict. Waya led Jack deeper into the valley, past the small homes, and towards a larger structure. It was simple but sturdily built, made of wood and stone with a large fire pit in the center. There were a few people gathered around the fire, their faces lined with age but their eyes sharp with intelligence. Jack could feel their gazes as they watched him, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. Waya walked up to the fire and greeted the group in her native tongue. Jack stood back, feeling like an outsider in a world he didn't understand. He had been raised on tales of the Apache, on stories of their fierceness and their unwillingness to bend to anyone's will. But here among these people there was no hostility, no anger, just a quiet strength that was almost overwhelming. After a few moments, Waya turned to Jack. "Jack, this is Chief Kitchie," she said, motioning to the eldest man sitting by the fire. His hair was long and silver, his face marked by the years of his life. There was something in his gaze that reminded Jack of the desert, tough, enduring, but full of wisdom. The chief stood slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. "You are the one Waya spoke of," he said in a voice that was deep and steady. It was more of a statement than a question. Jack nodded, unsure of what to say. He was used to dealing with men who were quick to draw weapons and speak in threats. But this man, this chief, didn't seem interested in intimidation. There was no suspicion in his eyes, only a calm understanding. "I am," Jack said. "I'm just passing through. Waya offered me a place here." Kitchie studied him for a moment, his eyes never leaving Jack's. Then he gave a slow nod. "Waya doesn't offer things lightly," the chief said. "She speaks the truth when she says she can give you a family. If you stay here, you will be part of this family. We take care of one another, and we expect loyalty in return." Jack wasn't sure what to think of the offer. Family, loyalty. He had spent most of his life running from the idea of being close to anyone. But something about the way Kitchie spoke, the way Waya had looked at him with those soft, steady eyes made him think that maybe, just maybe, he could believe in it. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Jack said, his voice quiet. Kitchie's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. "None of us are ever ready. Life is not about being ready. It is about being willing. We all choose our path. Some paths lead to loneliness and anger. Others lead to connection and healing. It is up to you to decide." Jack looked away, his mind filled with memories of his brother, of the years spent alone on the road, hunting down men and women who had wronged others. It had been a life of vengeance and survival, not one of connection or peace. "I don't know if I can change," Jack admitted, his voice rough. The chief didn't respond immediately. Instead, he gestured for Jack to sit by the fire. Jack hesitated, but something in Kitchie's calm demeanor told him there was no harm in sitting, so he did. "Changing is not the same as forgetting," Kitchie said after a long pause. "You don't need to forget your past to move forward, but you can choose to let go of its hold on you." For the first time in a long while, Jack felt something stir in his chest. A warmth, a hope, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe Kitchie was right. Maybe he didn't need to keep running. Maybe, for the first time, he could stop and stay. As the fire crackled and the stars began to fill the sky above them, Jack looked around the camp, at the people who had built a life here despite everything. They had lost so much, yet they had managed to hold on to what mattered most, each other. Jack turned to Waya, who was sitting beside him now, her eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time Jack was beginning to believe that it might be worth staying to find out. The days in the Apache camp passed in a peaceful rhythm that Jack had never known before. He woke early to the sounds of nature, the birds calling, the rustling of the leaves in the wind and the distant rush of the stream. The mornings were calm, and the evenings were filled with quiet conversation around the fire. It was a life he had never imagined for himself, but one that began to feel right. But the peace was fragile. It always seemed to hang on the edge of danger, like a storm waiting to break. Jack had learned quickly that although the Apache had found a safe haven in the hills, they were never truly free from the threat of violence. The land was still dangerous, and the people who once sought to destroy them hadn't forgotten. Jack could sense the tension in the air, even when it wasn't spoken aloud. He saw it in the way the warriors trained daily, in the way the elders whispered warnings about the outside world. It was only a matter of time before trouble found them. Jack had only been with the Apache for a few weeks when the first signs of danger appeared. It came in the form of smoke on the horizon, a thin, dark cloud rising against the blue sky. At first it seemed harmless, just the smoke from a fire, but as the day wore on and the smoke grew thicker, the calm of the camp shifted. The warriors gathered in silence, their faces unreadable. Jack knew something was wrong. He had seen enough of the world to recognize the signs of an attack. The smoke wasn't natural. It was a signal. Someone was coming, and they weren't coming in peace. "What is it?" Jack asked, stepping toward Waya, who had been standing near the fire, her face calm but her eyes alert. She turned to him, her expression serious. "It's the bounty hunters. They've found us." The words hit Jack like a punch to the gut. The bounty hunters had been after Waya since the day he first met her, and now they were coming to take her and anyone else who stood in their way. He knew what kind of men these bounty hunters were. They weren't just after a reward. They were after blood. "We have to prepare," Waya said, her voice steady but urgent. "We'll fight." "We don't have a choice," Jack nodded, his heart racing. He had been prepared for many things in his life, but this was different. These weren't just outlaws. These men had a specific mission, and that mission was Waya. If they were coming for her, they would stop at nothing to get her. As the warriors prepared, Jack couldn't help but notice how calm everyone was. The Apache didn't panic. They didn't rush around in a frenzy. They moved with purpose, gathering weapons, securing the camp, and preparing for what was to come. Jack had always fought alone, but now, in the face of this attack, he realized how much stronger these people were when they stood together. Waya, too, moved with quiet determination. She joined the warriors, offering them guidance and strategy. It was clear that she was no ordinary woman. She was a leader, and she had earned the respect of everyone in the camp. Jack watched her, impressed by her strength and poise. She wasn't just fighting to survive, she was fighting to protect the people she loved. Hours passed, and the smoke grew thicker. The sound of horses grew louder as the bounty hunters closed in on the camp. Jack could feel the tension in the air like a bowstring pulled tight. There was no turning back now. "We'll take up positions along the ridge," Waya said, her voice low. "We'll use the rocks for cover. They won't expect us to fight back like this." Jack followed her, his hand on the grip of his revolver. He had never fought alongside anyone before, but there was something about the Apache that made him feel like he was part of something bigger. They fought with unity, with a bond that Jack had never known. As they positioned themselves along the ridge, the sounds of the bounty hunters grew louder. The first riders appeared, their silhouettes dark against the horizon. Jack could see their faces now, rough men with hardened expressions, all of them armed and ready for a fight. The Apache warriors, hidden in the rocks, held their fire. They waited, their eyes focused on the approaching riders. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. He had faced many battles in his life, but this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about something much more important. This was about protecting a family. When the bounty hunters finally came into view, the Apache attacked. It was swift and silent, like a storm breaking. Arrows flew through the air, striking the riders before they even had a chance to react. The sound of hooves pounding the earth was drowned out by the war cries of the Apache warriors as they moved with speed and precision, attacking from all directions. Jack didn't hesitate. He had learned the Apache way quickly, how to move silently, how to use the land to his advantage. He drew his revolver and took aim, firing at the riders who were attempting to make a break for the camp. His shots rang out, and one of the bounty hunters fell from his horse. The rest of them scattered, trying to regroup and return fire. The battle was chaotic, but the Apache moved with practiced skill. They knew the land, and they used it to their advantage, striking quickly and disappearing into the shadows. Jack kept moving with them, feeling the adrenaline surge through his body. For the first time in his life, he wasn't alone. He was fighting for something bigger than a reward. As the battle raged on, Jack saw Waya leading the charge, her movements swift and deadly. She was a force of nature, cutting down the bounty hunters with precision. It was clear that she was not just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her people, for her family. The battle lasted for hours, the sound of gunfire and war cries echoing through the hills. But in the end, the Apache triumphed. The bounty hunters were scattered, their numbers thinned, and those who remained were forced to retreat. Jack stood among the Apache warriors, panting and covered in dirt, his revolver still smoking. He looked around at the faces of the people who had fought beside him. They were tired, but there was no fear in their eyes. They had defended their home and they had won. Waya approached Jack, her face serious but with a hint of relief in her eyes. "You fought well," she said, her voice soft but full of gratitude. Jack nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "I was just doing what needed to be done." She smiled faintly, but there was something more in her eyes. "You're one of us now," she said simply. For the first time since he had arrived at the camp, Jack felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a man passing through anymore. He was part of something. He was part of a family. As the sun set behind the hills, casting the world in shades of red and gold, Jack realized that this was where he belonged. This was where he was meant to be. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a peace that he had never known before. The battle had ended, but the echoes of gunfire still lingered in Jack's ears. The bounty hunters had retreated, their ranks broken, and the Apache had once again defended their home. The air was thick with dust and the smell of smoke, but amidst the chaos, Jack felt something shift within him. It wasn't the rush of victory or the satisfaction of a job well done. It was something deeper, something more profound. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the valley in a soft golden light, the Apache camp began to settle. The warriors gathered around the fire, tending to the wounded, while the children and elders returned to their routines, as if the battle had never happened. It was clear to Jack that life here was lived with an understanding that peace was fleeting. But the bond between them was unshakable. Waya, who had been leading the charge against the bounty hunters, stood by the fire, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. She moved with the same grace as always, but there was something different in her eyes now. The tension that had been there before, the weight of the promise she had made to Jack, seemed to have lightened. She had defended her people, and she had kept her word. Jack watched her from across the camp, feeling a sense of admiration for her that he couldn't quite explain. She wasn't just the woman he had met in the desert. She was a leader, a protector, and someone who had lived through hardships Jack couldn't begin to imagine. And yet, here she was, standing tall with the strength of someone who had made peace with the world. Despite everything that had happened, as night settled in, the chief Kitchi called for a meeting around the fire. Jack stood at the edge of the circle, listening quietly as the warriors shared their thoughts on the battle. They spoke in their language, but the meaning was clear in their tone. They had won, but at a cost. The bounty hunters would be back, and the Apache would need to stay vigilant. But amid the talk of future threats, Kitchi turned to Jack. His weathered face was calm, and his eyes held a deep understanding of the world. "You fought well today." "Jack," Kitchi said, his voice deep and steady. "You have earned your place here." Jack looked at him, surprised. He had never expected to be welcomed like this, especially after everything he had done in the past. He had spent so many years hunting criminals, tracking them down without hesitation, without thought for the lives they led or the families they left behind. Now he was standing in front of the man who had once been the leader of a powerful tribe, and Kitchi was offering him something that felt both humbling and impossible: acceptance. "I don't know what to say," Jack replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd find a place like this." "You don't have to say anything," Kitchi said with a slight smile. "Your actions speak for you. You have proven that you are more than just a man with a gun. You are part of something bigger, and in this place that means more than anything." Jack nodded, though he couldn't fully understand it. How had he gone from being a lone cowboy, wandering the deserts of the West, to standing in the heart of an Apache camp, accepted as one of their own? It didn't make sense. But as he looked around at the people he had fought beside, the ones who had treated him like family, he realized something. It wasn't just about the battles fought or the victories won. It was about the connections made, the trust built, and the shared purpose that had brought them together. For the first time in years, Jack wasn't just surviving, he was living. Later that evening, Waya approached him by the fire, her silhouette framed by the flickering flames. The camp had quieted down, the night air cool and still. The stars hung above them, a blanket of light that seemed endless. "Jack," Waya said softly, her voice gentle but firm, "you did well today. You didn't have to fight, but you chose to stand with us. And because of that, you've earned more than just our respect. You've earned our trust." Jack looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. It was one thing to be accepted by the chief and the warriors. It was another to be trusted by Waya herself. He had come to realize that her promise, the one she had made to him when they first met, was more than just about offering him a family. It was about giving him a chance at redemption, a chance to find something worth living for. "I don't know if I deserve it," Jack said quietly, the words more to himself than to her. "You do," Waya replied without hesitation. "No one is beyond redemption, Jack." We all carry our past with us, but it doesn't define who we are. It's what we choose to do with our future that matters. Jack felt a lump form in his throat. Her words cut deeper than any battle he had fought, deeper than any wound he had ever received. For years he had believed that he was defined by his actions, by the mistakes he had made, by the people he had lost. But here in this place, surrounded by these people, he realized that maybe he could be more than the man he had been. "Maybe I'm not ready," Jack said, his voice rough. "Maybe I'm not ready for this kind of life." Waya smiled, her expression kind but knowing. No one is ever ready. But sometimes life gives us the chance to choose, and when we do, we find out who we really are. Jack thought about her words long after she had walked away, leaving him to sit in the stillness of the night. The stars above him seemed endless, and for the first time in his life, Jack didn't feel so alone. There was a place for him here, a place where he wasn't just a man with a past, but someone who could build a future. The next morning, as the sun rose over the valley, Jack stood outside the camp, watching the first light of day break across the land. The desert, which had once seemed so cold and unforgiving, now felt like a part of him. It was no longer just a place he had wandered through. It was the beginning of a new chapter in his life. As Waya joined him, standing by his side, Jack felt a sense of peace settle within him. The Apache were more than just survivors, they were a family, and in their strength Jack had found his own. He wasn't alone anymore. "I'm ready," Jack said quietly, his voice steady. Waya turned to him, her eyes bright with a mixture of pride and something deeper, something more hopeful. "I know," she said, and together, they watched the sun rise higher, bringing light to the valley and to the life they would build together. Jack Turner rode through the dry, cracked earth of the desert, his horse's hooves kicking up the dust with every step. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Jack had lived a hard life, the kind of life that the desert often reflected, rough, unforgiving, and full of solitude. His face, weathered by the sun and hardened by years of hardship, told the story of a man who had seen too much loss. The death of his brother had changed him forever. After that day, Jack became a bounty hunter, a man who hunted those who had made mistakes, those who needed to pay for their wrongdoings. It was just another day for Jack, another day spent riding across the barren land looking for his next target. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for anything out of place. A cloud of dust in the distance caught his attention. A rider, a lone figure, was coming toward him. Jack's hand instinctively moved to the handle of his revolver, his fingers brushing against the worn leather of the holster. He had no idea who this rider was, but in his line of work he never trusted anyone he didn't know. As the rider came closer, Jack could see that it was a woman. She sat tall on her horse, her posture straight, her face calm. There was something about her that made Jack pause. She didn't look like a typical settler or traveler. Her dark eyes seemed to shine with a quiet strength, a strength Jack hadn't seen in many women before. Her long black hair blew in the wind, and she wore a simple yet strong-looking outfit: boots, a leather vest, and a worn-out poncho. Jack could tell by her look that she was no stranger to the harshness of the land. The woman stopped her horse a few yards away from Jack, her eyes locked on his. Jack's hand remained on his revolver, but he didn't pull it out. "Not yet, are you lost?" Jack asked, his voice steady but guarded. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she studied him, her gaze steady and unblinking. There was something almost eerie about the way she looked at him, like she could see straight through him. "No," she said finally, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not lost." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Then what brings you out here?" The woman's lips curled slightly, but there was no smile in her expression. "I'm not the one you're looking for, cowboy," she said, her words carrying a hint of warning. "But I can see you're searching for something." Jack felt his pulse quicken. There was something about her words that felt too accurate. How did she know? Who was she? He didn't like being caught off guard. "I'm looking for a bounty," Jack said, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. "A woman named Waya, have you seen her?" The woman's face remained calm, but Jack could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes. For a moment, it felt like the world around them stood still. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. "I know where she is," the woman said, her tone changing slightly. "But she's not a threat to you." Jack's grip tightened on his revolver. "I didn't ask if she was a threat," he replied. "I asked if you've seen her." The woman's eyes softened for a brief moment as though she understood his pain. "I've seen her," she said slowly. "But she's not what you think." Jack wasn't sure what to make of her words. His job was simple: track down criminals, collect the reward, and move on. That was it. But this woman's presence was confusing him. There was something about her that made him want to listen. Something about her that felt familiar. "Where is she?" Jack asked again, his patience wearing thin. The woman paused, then looked Jack directly in the eye. "She's in the hills to the north. But if you're planning on going after her, Cowboy, you should know this: you're making a mistake." Jack's brow furrowed. "Why's that?" The woman's gaze shifted away for a moment, her eyes scanning the distant hills. "Waya isn't just any woman. She's the last of her tribe, the Apaches. They've been hunted down by men like you. She's fighting to survive, to protect the little bit of her people that's left." Jack's expression hardened. He'd heard rumors about the Apaches, the attacks, the raids, but he didn't care about all that. To him, Waya was just another bounty, another reward to collect. Nothing more. He had no time for stories or excuses. "Doesn't matter to me," Jack said. "She's a criminal. That's all I need to know." The woman's face grew more serious and her voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't have to do this. If you spare me, I can give you a family." Jack blinked, surprised by her words. "A family?" he repeated, confused. "What do you mean?" The woman's voice was barely audible as she spoke again. "I can give you what you've been searching for. A place where you can belong. A family that will accept you." Jack stared at her, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Family? He hadn't thought about that in years. Since the death of his brother, Jack had been alone. He'd shut everyone out, focusing only on survival and vengeance. The idea of a family, of belonging to something, was a distant dream, one he had long buried deep inside him. But here, in the middle of the desert, with this mysterious woman offering him something he didn't even know he wanted, Jack felt a flicker of doubt. What if she was telling the truth? What if there was more to life than hunting and killing? Before Jack could respond, the woman's voice broke through his thoughts. "Spare me and I'll show you." Jack hesitated. He wasn't used to making decisions based on anything but logic. His instincts told him to finish what he'd started, to track down Waya and collect the reward. But something about the woman's words made him pause. "You think I'll believe you?" Jack asked, his voice low. The woman didn't flinch. "I think you want to believe me." Jack stood still, his mind racing. The desert sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery reds and purples. The world felt suspended in time as Jack weighed his options. In the end, he did something he never thought he would. He lowered his gun. "I'm listening," Jack said quietly, his heart heavy with the weight of the choice he had just made.